Thank you everyone for joining our What's Hot in Security webinar today with Ingram Micro's Emerging Business Group. Highlighted vendors, Arctic Wolf, Mimecast, and SentinelOne. My name is Kelly Bird, Senior Marketing Manager here at Ingram Micro. This webinar will last approximately 45 minutes. In terms of general housekeeping, your lines have been muted for the duration of the webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop your question in the Q&A box on your screen. Thank you everyone for joining, and I'll hand things over to Jimmy Augustine, Ingram Micro's Chief Technology Evangelist. Jimmy, take it away.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for the warm introduction. I want to personally thank you for not only your business, but for your time commitment here. We realize that your time is very precious. And with that in mind, we're going to make this a little bit different from previous webcasts. What we're going to do is we're going to make this a conversation, a panel conversation, if you will. We're not going to do death by PowerPoint. As Kelly mentioned, I am very fortunate to be the Chief Technology Evangelist for the Emerging Business Group at Ingram Micro. But for today's conversation, I'm going to serve as the MC and the panelist, if you will. And I have the fortune of being joined by two amazing security professionals, Jerry and Brian. Jerry, would you mind quickly introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about your security background?
Sure, thank you, Jimmy. I'm Jerry Diedrichson. I'm a technology consultant here at Ingram Micro, going on about 2 years here at this organization. Prior to this, I've worked as a channel systems engineer and pre-sales engineer at FireEye and ForcePoint, respectively. But prior to that, I was a customer for about 20 years. And so I see this business from everybody's seat, from department head managing budgets and people to being the technician with the pocket protector. And so I understand the different aspects of cybersecurity from just looking through different prisms. So that's my story.
And I'm sure you're sticking to it, right, Jerry?
I am.
So we also have the warm capabilities of Brian Rawls. Brian is a tremendous partner in crime for us. And Brian, do you want to introduce yourself and share a little bit about your security background?
Yeah, sure, Jimmy, no problem. So Brian Rawls, I'm a senior technical marketing engineer at Ingram Micro. Been here 11 years into May, this month coming up. Had many roles, starting pre-sales engineer, starting with Cisco networking, then security and wireless leads. Moved to a technical marketing manager. Then I became senior of that. I was architect of Symantec with Blue Coat acquisition, which I became a Symantec Knight. I'm also the original creator of the virtualized edition of the security line card, the tool that many of you probably already use. And currently I am the lead on all managed service vendors that we provide on our EBG and security line card. I understand MSPs, how they work, function, and I'm also an InfraGard member.
Well, excellent. Thank you guys for the introduction. And let's go ahead and get started with the very first question. Jerry, I'm going to pose this to you and then ask Brian to add any color or commentary. So why is security a boardroom issue?
Well, security has always been a boardroom issue at some level because stealing is stealing. And that's really the issue of the day is the products that are being stolen today are intellectual properties in customer lists and things that are very critical to the life of a business instead of a box of product or somebody falsifying time card entry and so forth. So today, the impact of this type of theft is really the life or death of the business. So there's considerably more interest at the executive level. Brian, what do you think?
Well, when I talk to executives, and it's on a frequent basis, many of our partners, a lot of this is budgetary. How does this fit into my current go-to-market strategy? And it does change whether I'm talking to a resale partner, reselling something to their end user customer and their capabilities as far as tools or services, or if they're an MSP. So the conversation definitely changes. Budget always seems to be somewhat lacking until we open up the hood a little bit, if we want to say it that way, and really understand the inherent risks and acceptable risks. And usually what I do in these circumstances is add the recommendation of doing a risk assessment, seeing what's involved with the new tools we need, what budget can be allowed, how much actual risk can we take on versus the budget that's needed in these scenarios. And that usually helps with even the shopping list. Like, what tools should I bring in? What staffing do I need to make those tools effective? And then what happens with, future planning, incident response, and things like that? If something does happen, do we have money set aside, or do we have cybersecurity insurance in place? All those other factors come into play when making some of these bigger security decisions when we're talking about tools and services and how to manage those tools to make them more effective.
That's awesome. Thank you for the color, Brian. So I promised my partners here in crime that I would ask some ad lib questions. So I guess a follow-on question would be, we continue to see how severe a hack has become. There's been, broad-based implications. Some of the CISOs and CIOs are losing their job once their organization has been hacked. Do you guys want to add any color or commentary on what happens in these dire situations?
Yeah, these are, this is essentially what business is going through today. CISOs don't sleep at night because they're constantly worrying about where the next attack is coming from. The tactics and techniques and procedures, or TTPs is the term used in the trade, they're becoming so elegant and so mature that they're becoming more and more difficult to see and to detect. And so what we're doing now in the industry is we have to start assuming that these bad actors are already in our enterprises. And so now what we need to do is we need to have containment fields set up around the data and the critical information to ensure that when they are in the network, because let's not assume that they aren't, that when they are in the network, that we can limit the blast radius, limit the impact of their activities.
Yeah, Jerry, you said it. I mean, it is about limiting your exposure to these risks. They're going to happen. You're going to get hacked at some point. Some of the managed services I work with, some of their go-to-markets is how many of their new partners are already infected when they open the doors. And that number's around 70% of new onboarding customers are already compromised. I think the biggest thing, and I follow like NIST, and there's NIST 860, which is incident response planning, is being prepared in every scenario. What do I do when it happens, not if it happens? So as long as you have all your documentation, everybody educated, all your security controls, parameters put in place, you shouldn't lose your job as a CISO if you did it right, because there is an understanding that it's going to happen. You are limiting the risk of how impactful it is to that business. So if you do your job properly, then you should keep your job. It's those that usually don't and don't have all those I's dotted and T's crossed that are going to lose their job, because that'll be a larger impact on the company.
That's great commentary, guys. Thank you for the color. And as Kelly mentioned, if you have any questions for our panelists or myself, feel free to go ahead and put that in the chat or question facility in the webcast, if you don't mind. So let's move on. Brian, this question is for you. What are the major trends in security?
There's lots of trends right now. I know a big one I'm seeing, at least on the attack vector, is AI. So the introduction of AI from the hacker's perspective, not the preventative aspect, is going to increase these attacks exponentially. They no longer need to create things and recreate things or do what they call polymorphic, where there's a known signature and they tweak it just enough to make it unknown a 0 day again. They're going to have AI building these things for them, and they're going to come out faster than ever. Phishing attempts are going to be more prevalent. Text message attempts are going to be more prevalent. Being that said, we're going to need more advanced tools. And the problem with these more advanced tools is we don't have enough staffing to do what we need to be effective with those tools. So you hear a lot of rumblings more about like SOAR, more automation, doing more with less staff, and then adding those managed service plays as third parties after vetting to fit that business need precisely. And something I read, I just want to add, I read a lot and do a lot of research. I was reading CyberSeek Org. They actually have a heat map, and currently, and I'll touch on this a lot with staffing. It says currently there's 755,000 open cybersecurity positions in the United States, and that number keeps growing every single month. So when I harp on staffing and automation and managed services, this is why. We just don't have enough people to prevent all these new actions, especially with AI driving, things now. They're just going to come at us even harder, and we're not going to have enough people to do anything, even if we buy the best and greatest tools. Every breach that's been out there had the biggest expensive tools. And when auditors come in, it shows that we had everything identified. We had high, we had severe, we had medium alerts, and we didn't have enough people to do the actions needed to re-secure those environments after the tools we have found what was wrong with those environments and vulnerabilities that were in those environments. So that's a huge impact I see going, especially with economics going on right now and people losing jobs. It's just going to get worse this year and next with pending recession. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that.
Oh, that's great, Brian. And Jerry, do you have any additional comments?
It's hard, just to kind of ride that tailgate on Brian's thoughts here, is that what we really need to do is to start thinking about how we could be more proactive in a reactive way. What I mean by that is that we have to have incident response. We have to plan for the eventuality, as I said earlier, of something bad happening in an enterprise. Nobody wants to hear it, but that's the reality of our day. So people is key, but services is really what's going to back up the need that we have for the talent that we are missing in the space today. So it doesn't scale when you have every enterprise or every customer or small business in the United States trying to staff people to keep their enterprises safe. It just doesn't pencil out. So having a managed service provider that can help monitor and mitigate problems is really probably the best place to go, unless you're a giant enterprise, a Fortune 50 or Fortune 100 company.
So that's very intriguing and interesting, Jerry. So basically, you have to plan on the the eventuality that you are going to be hacked. And one way that you can plan ahead is to be proactive from an incident response perspective, and that enables you to build the plan, to test it, to make sure it's adequate, so that when you are hacked, you know how to respond. That's very insightful.
Absolutely. And we really got the bookends, right? You have to have intel to try to understand why you would be a target, and then to try and watch your six, if you will, from that perspective. But on the other end, you have to have a solid incident response plan where you have your data's backed up, you're comfortable with it, confident in it, if the test those backup procedures. And it's more than backup, it's incident response. You need to know when the flag goes up, who's going to show up on deck, what their job is, what their role is, and they have to execute that flawlessly, which comes through practice.
Let me add to that too, because this is very important. Instant response is something I lead with quite often, if you haven't already kind of noticed that. So as I mentioned before, NIST 6, the 800-60, it's like an 80-page document that walks you through all the instant response pieces, the documentation, the trainings, the backup disaster recoveries, and there's a subsection for forensics. And this is why I want to bring this up. And forensic being is, you got breached, what do I do? How do I clean it up? Prove to regulatory compliance to make sure that it's been done properly. We have a baseline and we can restart imaging those machines. And the reason I bring that up is I've had 2 partners probably in the last 2 months call me. They're already re-imaging machines. They didn't have a plan. They wanted to get business back up and running as fast as possible. And I informed them nicely that that probably isn't the best approach. And 2 weeks later, one of those called me right back saying, yeah, we didn't know what we're quite doing. We're reinfected. We need somebody to go in and actually do those forensics that you mentioned before. So moment of truth with that is you really do need to have a plan, understand what needs to be done. Because if you start doing things you think's proper just to get things up and running, to make money and get that business operational again, and your backups got infected as well in that process, and you didn't really know how that breach occurred, then you probably aren't fixing what actually made it happen. It's going to reinfect you, and you're back in the same boat, and you're going to lose even more money long term, versus just having a plan of attack makes so much more sense. Even a retainer or who to call. All these breaches happen on weekends. The biggest one ever, 4th of July, is coming up in what, a month and a half now. That's the #1 breached holiday because we're on skeleton crews, and they usually start on Friday. And if you are breached, you're not getting a PO to even get started till Tuesday morning. So just keep that in mind. Having somebody on speed dial at any day, any weekend to call to help you out with that, a managed service per se, is really key here. We need to make sure we're covering all our ends when we talk about this.
And defense in depth is important in this discussion as well, because what we're talking about is the end, right? But there's a middle. In the middle is still to provide services and tools that are watching the shop. That we're making sure we're watching east and west traffic, making sure there's nothing unusual going on, making sure your users are behaving properly. So a lot of this starts with user behavior, but it starts with training and making your users aware of what they should and should not be doing, what they should be looking for, what they shouldn't click on. It all begins there. But when you talk about backups that might have, or people getting reinfected, you have backup tools that will actually scan a backup to inquire whether there's malicious content within the backup. So there's still tools that are very relevant and very necessary.
Yeah, I'll even add to that too. You said awareness trainings, and I always harp on this too. Human firewalls, and it's not just regulatory compliance audits like most of us do, where we get that checkbox. We all took that 15-20 minute training. We passed the 10 questions, we're compliant. This is building a culture. This is smaller, keep the information in your face, your employee's face, to understand that security is part of everything we do on a daily basis, not just that checkbox we do quarterly and forget about it. That really will make a big difference in a lot of people's businesses by making a security culture than just that checkbox for auditing purposes.
That's fascinating. And I would imagine, guys, tell me if I'm wrong here, that with employees working from home and on the road and all these cloud computing environments like Box and Dropbox and Salesforce.com and Workday, you go down the list. I would imagine the attack surface has become larger, more cumbersome for CISOs. Any thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, I mean, the attack surface is huge, and this is what we keep having to circle back around to is that can we contain that? And that's why it's so important to manage the inside of our organizations and our businesses and the data there with least privilege, zero trust mentalities, assuming that the bad guys are already in the enterprise. And so you're protecting your data in the enterprise so that those bad actors can't do harm. That is really the key today because nothing else has worked. Honestly.
Yeah, the perimeter defense is completely gone, in my opinion. Yes, we have perimeters, we have data centers, but half your employees are on a hybrid model. They're in the office 2, maybe 3 days a week. The other times they're remote. Things don't work the same as they do on premise versus being over VPN or not VPN'd in. You do have some more field-based people coming in. We've adopted a whole bunch of new SaaS applications that were spun up very quickly during the pandemic. Those are not built for security by any means, and we don't know where our data is or if it's safe or if things are being sent in clear text. I mean, those are all inherently open. So there's a lot of different parameters. I know infrastructure as a service. Google is more than up and coming. They're going to start being more prevalent as Azure and AWS lead that field, but it's that shared responsibility. I'm just hitting all this stuff at a high level, but yeah, there's a huge attack vector that is opened up with this loss of this perimeter defense we've lost over the last 5 years, and especially over this pandemic period. So yeah, there's a lot more to attribute to, and not just, you know, standard defenses are going to work anymore. You got to think beyond that. And where is my data? And to, you know, Jerry's point is, it's the sanctioned device based on that sanctioned user and their rights to get that data, and only that data, because that is their job role and only their job role. Privilege access management, big key. Zero trust is definitely something that's up and coming and should be talked about often.
It is a much maligned term, and everybody, a lot of people have fatigue about hearing about zero trust. So if you come back to the concept of least privilege, you want to grant users the least amount of privilege necessary for them to be effective in their work. And that can come down to giving them privileges at a certain day, a certain time, for a certain duration, and then stripping those privileges away when they don't need them. Yes, it's granular. Yes, you're going to have torches and pitchforks at the front door because people are not going to like the inconvenience. But data security is not meant to be convenient.
Yeah, you also said it too with user behavior, Jerry, too. It's going to be a big element of all this. All these identified machine learning techniques based on behaviors on day to day and how everybody functions can really determine if it is that sanctioned person on that device accessing that data based on a whole bunch of parameters, including keyboard sensitivity, touch, speed of typing. I mean, it's amazing some of the things that are coming out with the EUBA type of behavioral based threat analysis type pieces that are coming out today. It's pretty neat.
That's amazing, guys. Great commentary here. The only thing I wish I had was another cup of coffee. This has been very entertaining. I like it. I would go as far as saying as I love it. So the idea of the perimeters become archaic, and the idea of a perimeter is dissipated over the last several years. And it's just fascinating to me. You know, case in point, I was reading something a couple weeks ago that when you're traveling on business, be very careful about plugging your phone into one of the, you know, chargers at the airport, because the bad guys have figured a way to hack your phones. It's just incredible. I mean, I empathize with somebody that's a CISO having to deal with all of these risks on a consistent day-to-day basis.
Yeah, you're. Oh, go ahead, Jay.
I was just going to say, sometimes putting very sophisticated devices in the hands of people who aren't necessarily trained to use it is a risk in and of itself.
Yeah, and you're spot on, Jimmy. There's so many risks. People don't think about it. The chargers. When I even go to a hotel or an airport, I bring the actual pronged adapter for my USB, not just plug it into a standard USB. Because you're right, they can change the USB to now exfiltrate your phone if you're charging off of that. Especially hotels, they have more time to change those out, and all of a sudden, if you charge your phone directly to the USB, it will be exfiltrating that data directly out of it, versus using the standard plug with your USB into a standard outlet. They can't do that. So you constantly have to be vigilant. I know many things we talk about, like pineapple devices in airports and stuff, and people are getting very blatant about that, where it's a device that you can connect to that is malicious, that you think is an actual access point to gain wireless access, Wi-Fi, and it's not. They're doing the same thing. They're exfiltrating your data. But if you don't know better, and it's, you know, Starbucks One instead of just Starbucks, who knows the average person not to connect to Starbucks One versus standard Starbucks One? You really need to know what Wi-Fi or not connect to those, because you don't know which is safe and which is not safe. I mean, there's softwares out there that'll help determine that and take some of that off of you from a security approach. But generally speaking, the average user has no idea what they're connecting to.
Comes back to that training, awareness training. Give them a cell phone that has a data plan. Use your own cell phone.
Agreed.
There's certain small things that if you're trying to save a couple bucks, you know, you're going to pay later.
Agreed.
Yeah, I like the adjective vigilance. That's what security requires in today's age. And Brian, you mentioned the word, the human firewall. I think that's so appropriate given this conversation. It really comes down to the amount of training, awareness, and helping your employees understand the risk and what to avoid, you know, in certain situations. So I love the terminology, the human firewall.
Yeah.
Well,
It's a
you
good,
realize that's a swinging pendulum too. In a lot of cases, the user is the weakest link in the security chain. But in cases where a user is appropriately trained and aware, they can be a very strong link in that security chain as well.
Yep, it's not the technology, it's the people, correct?
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on. So, Jerry, I will pose this question to you. Apps, API, and cloud security. Why are these certain vectors hot in the marketplace?
Well, they're hot threats in the marketplace. These facets of technology are really the new frontier of cyber warfare. These are the things that we don't see as users. So weaponized applications that people are downloading off of the Google Store or from the App Store at Apple. Apple's not as bad as Google, but weaponized applications, that goes back to the old virus days. There's malicious content and macro-enabled documents. So this is really nothing new. But what's happening now is a proliferation of smartphones. And as we were talking about earlier, public Wi-Fi sniffing, things along those lines are really creating a problem at the app level. And what's happening now is that API security is one of the most nefarious of these because we can't see it. So you have applications on the backside of our machines that are actually talking to each other. And if something's weaponized or something's compromised, we don't have any idea. You can't see unexpected events. So that's a real challenge right now. In detection, by the time you know it's there, it might be too late.
yeah, I'll add to that. So, well, I talked about it previously before, but it's credential loss because things are not built with security in mind, and these APIs are connected and open to connect and communicate with other applications. And a lot of these do send in clear text. Credential loss is a big problem with these SaaS applications, these APIs, and becomes a problem. Same thing with infrastructure as a service, being that share medium. We have to still secure it. A lot of problems happen with, S3 buckets, EC2 instances, where it's just not configured properly. It's somebody that doesn't know better. They're trying to save some money, only, using what they want to use at that specific time, and they get in there and they start spinning things up, and they forget to check a box. I mean, even it's so easy to do that, and sometimes that can leave it wide open. And you have to make sure that, beyond just SaaS, but infrastructure and who is taking care of what, that security is a big part of that as well. I mean, it's essentially on-premise perimeter defense, but in the cloud somewhere else. You have to think of it like it's another perimeter defense that's just not and it's not on your location, and you can't physically touch it. We still have to secure this stuff. So, I mean, there's lots of tools that are out there. There's lots of vendors out there for API security. Actually, part of what Jerry and I do with our emerging business group is we work with our director and we go out there and we vet out new potential emerging technologies that solve these problems. And API security has been a really big one of them. I know for me, my background, I was an administrator for CASB for many years, so I can talk through and through on CASB. CASB is a great product. It is something, it's a GUI, so you kind of get what you get and you can't really expand beyond that. But certain ones that are out there are made for SMB and some for enterprise. If you get a good one, it can really help prevent a lot of that sprawl with these SaaS applications, or even give you guidance on which applications are more risky than other applications. And then they can add that, behavioral based component to it. And we can look for anomalies and sequence-based pieces of things that happen that could be geographically located, or size of downloads, or changing names of files within these applications that would be flagged as well. And then they work kind of like a data loss prevention tool. So there are tools to help with this, but they're new, especially API. We're still vetting somebody out who is a great fit for Ingram Micro to be on our line card for this. We're just not there yet because it's such a new thing people are trying to prevent. We don't know all the aspects yet.
That's tremendous. Thank you both, Brian and Jerry. I was wondering, you touched on a word, Brian. I was wondering if you could tell the audience what the acronym stands for. You mentioned CASB.
Yep, it's a Cloud Access Security Broker.
Okay. And what, in layman's terms, What does a CASB product allow an end user to do?
So as I was kind of referring to, within that tool, you can pull in your applications. It'll look into best case practices, your SaaS applications, your infrastructure. It'll actually look into devices that have other applications on them, and they can put them through a vetting process based on security. And if it should be adopted, it should be blocked. It could be part of a decision-making process if that is better than one we currently have. It can actually even be used to find redundant applications and platforms and just increase security or lower security spend to find budget. Like, let's say you have Teams and Blue Jeans and Cisco and all the platforms, and we're buying everything, but we have Office 365 licenses. Why don't we just use Teams? You know, something like that for one example. The behavioral based piece, at least the one that I'm familiar with, I was administrator of, that was amazing because you could drill it down to the device, the user, their behaviors, and what time of day, and then bring it back to, as I was saying, the amount of downloaded or combination. Like, there's different things anomaly based we could look at. If this person downloaded so much at this time from this location, and then an hour later they downloaded it from another location that was unable to happen or get there in that amount of time, it would flag that and block that from happening. So there's all these different aspects looking into SaaS infrastructure, best known, general practice of configurations, behavioral based piece to help you make decisions, but ultimately secure those applications you already have and make the best sanctioned decisions on what we should use on which devices, whether they're mobile, PC, laptops, desktops, whatever it may be.
Yeah,
That's
and you
great,
take that to the next level. You've got cloud-based infrastructure where you funnel your clients through an agent on their machine into an iBoss, for example, into an iBoss infrastructure, and they're going to know who you are. They're going to know what you're allowed to do, where you're allowed to go, what apps are allowed to run. They're going to report on your activity. They're going to do DLP analysis, make sure that you're not exfiltrating information that you shouldn't. So that's another facet to the CASB-like type of security, which honestly is really very robust for the small medium business because they don't have to do anything besides install a client and manage a console. No equipment is required. So these are the types of services, the CASB SASE type of services, edge security, that adds a lot of value right now because our clients are, they get tool fatigue. They don't have the money, they can't buy them all, they can't train their people, they can't manage it. So there's a lot of value in CASB-like and SASE type of services.
Yep, bad points.
That's great points, guys. And I think, Jerry, you touched on data loss prevention. At the end of the day, that's one of the value props of a CASB product or service. Is that correct?
It is. It's one of many. Data loss comes in many flavors, and there's many tools to monitor that data. Anything from a credit card number to somebody's name, address, and phone number. PII, PCI. I mean, we can go on with the alphabet soup here, but the key in all of this is that DLP, data loss prevention, its lowest common denominator is making sure that users either intentionally or unintentionally can't send information out of the organization that they shouldn't. And that's data that can get companies fined. It's data that could cause a company to lose their intellectual properties. There's a million reasons why you want to govern that.
To expand on that, just to clarify what you just said, whether it's a malicious insider trying to do it intentionally or an uneducated user, I know you alluded to that, Jerry. I just want to make sure the audience understands. Sometimes when people are, leaving the company, they're trying to exfiltrate their contacts lists, their accounts, things like that. That will be found and prevented. Versus just the user that just doesn't know better. It's going to prevent either one of those scenarios from happening.
Yeah, and there's education campaigns that can be put into play in a robust DLP platform that'll say, hey, did you really want to do this? You know, it pauses the activity, puts up a display, and asks the user, did you really mean to send the the keys to the kingdom outside of the organization? Oh no, I really didn't want to do that. So they can then do that. Or you can just not report to the user at all because it might be nefarious activity and it goes straight to information security team. So there's a lot of different ways of managing this particular aspect of data loss.
It'll even go to the extent, at least the one that I worked with, the malicious insiders that know more than the average user and know parameters like, oh, I'm going to change the name of this Excel file, or I'm going to split this Excel file into 4 different documents and rename each one of them. It actually helps catch that too. So if they know how to get around some of these techniques, they really don't know because it catches them anyway. It's pretty slick.
No, absolutely correct.
That's awesome. And I think the best example of an insider taking sensitive data, at least for me, from a sales perspective, is what Ed Snowden did when he stole or copied all of the sensitive classified documents to a thumb drive, and he was able to walk out of a government facility with that thumb drive. Just it's mind-boggling how simple that was.
Yep, that's why we restrict USBs now.
Well, exactly. And one of the more prevalent means of data exfiltration is to copy information to, let's say, a Gmail drafts folder, or it could be Hotmail, it could be anything, and because it doesn't actually send the data across the internet, it just parks it. So an endpoint will catch that because it's going to look at the data as it's loaded into the payload before it leaves the machine. So technically, it's a data in use case and not a data in at rest use case or data in motion use case.
Good point.
Cool. Very cool. All right, let's move on if you don't mind. So Brian, this is tailor-made for you, given your focus and your background. Managed security services, why is this space so hot?
So I started alluding to it when we first came on, and it's that staffing component, that CyberSeek heat map, 755,000 open jobs. We aren't effective with the tools we already have. I know there's more statistics I've read. I believe it was FireEye a couple of years back said the SIM adoption for certain compliance continuous monitoring is only used effectively 40% of the time, meaning that no one is actually watching what that tool is doing. And it's only being used if something happens in those environments to drill down to what it was or for auditing purposes. Same thing with EDR. EDR as part of a cybersecurity campaign is now required as the CIS top 5 out of the 18 that needs to be put in place before a premium or a policy can even be talked about. So these tools are very, very noisy, and it needs a lot of staff to be effective with these tools once again. So where do we get this staff? Are you going to go hire $1 million in people to be effective with these tools? Or are we going to partner with a third party that knows these tools inside and out, certified on these tools, and can do it for the fraction of the cost of implementing that tool yourself, hiring the staff needed without trying to retain them, and getting more output for probably 2/3 of the price on average than actually doing it in-house yourself. And then you can take your engineers or analysts and use them for more project billable work instead of watching screens all day, and then just let these third-party organizations like vendors like MDR and XDR and SOC as a service vendors that are out there take most of the 24 hours and all the headaches, and then just bring them into an actionable item and a dashboard for your team. So it just really narrows down the need for less staff on the actual corporate level and puts it back onto, I'd say, the professionals that just literally, that's all their job is, to deal with this stuff all day, every day. So I think that's a first starting point, and I'll see if Jerry wants to jump in here.
Well, you've covered it pretty well. The bottom line we said earlier, these businesses can't afford to train, tool, hire, good solid staff, once they get them trained and up to speed, they get poached and, they go out the back door. So there's a lot of value in a managed service model, and there's a lot of upside from both the perspective of how much money you save in staffing, how effective you are, and that just passes right through the entire commerce link from user to reseller to distributor to manufacturer. There's value add all the way up and down the line.
Yeah, I'll jump into again. I deal with this all day. This is what I do all day. I work with like 15 of our EDR, MDR, XDR, OpenXDR, SOC service vendors. And my specialty is just vetting these out on your behalf, so you don't have to go vet out 15 of them and see which is the best fit, because everybody's definition is going to change. And it really depends on the need on the specific business. It's not going to be a fit for everybody, and every vendor is going to have a specific need for that MSP or for that resale customer, whatever it may be. And it really is, you have to hone in on is what component do you need? Is this a full blown, I need to add a SOC component, or do I need to add EDR and just have that EDR managed? So that might be a different conversation. Do I have a whole bunch of disparate tools that I already have in these customer environments and I need them all managed, in one central point, where some can't do that because they're only going to focus on their single EDR tool, their endpoint agent, and all the other things will be invisible. So then you still have to manage all the other ones. So even adding XDR, the extension of traffic from networking cloud to get additional visibility, and less focus on that EDR, they're still focusing on that EDR endpoint and adding the other telemetries to it. But what happens with only the focus on that, and what are they missing essentially just by extending it beyond that EDR? Then there's, do I want to have one vendor lock-in? You adopt a managed EDR, it's going to be that EDR from that specific vendor being managed. And if I have anything else in the environment, it's a rip and replace scenario. Do I want to do that or not? Does it make sense? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So all these different factors that factor in, and I'm always happy to walk everybody through all of these conversations and do discovery and find the best fit or multiple. Some people adopt one or two different scenarios from different vendors and it fits their customer base differently depending on the need, and that's acceptable too. And then they turn that into their own multi-tiered service to go to market and price accordingly. So there's lots of things to just keep in mind when you're talking about adding these services, and that's really where I live and breathe all day.
That's awesome. Great commentary. Thank you, guys. So this is an important question, one that we are getting on a consistent basis. What is cyber insurance and why has it become a major trend? Brian, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I think I brought this up very lightly earlier, but when we're talking cybersecurity insurance, and I did a whole webinar just about this for one of the vendors I support, it's hard to get a policy nowadays, especially with ransomware becoming more prevalent. So it's more risk on the cyber insurance agencies. So they're more stringent on giving you a policy. And if you get that policy, that premium is going to be probably 2 or 3 times what you might have been paying prior or what you've heard other people are paying, unless you do adopt other managed services and have all your ducks in a row and have all these controls that are identified, put into place. And if you don't have those, you might not get a policy at all, or you might get something that's so expensive it might not make sense. The big case with cybersecurity insurance is we're going to back you up just like any other insurance that's out there, that if something happens to your organization, we're going to step in with insurance and help cover different components of that. Now, it's very different based on each policy what's going to actually be covered. Now, if you get ransomware and they are asking for a ransom, that is not covered. It is going to be some company that is doing incident response, doing the forensic and audit work that will be part of what is covered by the insurance company. I have other people that are out there that said the premiums can get so expensive that they just have a bucket of money set aside instead of getting cybersecurity insurance. So it really depends, and a lot of that, the reason they do that is because they don't have enough staff, they don't have enough tools, they don't have enough people to actually become compliant enough for that cybersecurity agency to even get a premium that makes sense. So it is not an easy undertaking like it was probably 5 years ago. It is more stringent and it's very hard to obtain one.
Jerry, do you want to add?
Of course I do. Actually, cyber insurance it's one of those things that has become it was the easy button, like Brian said, several years back, and now it's becoming more and more difficult to obtain. But really what's happening, besides premiums being at an all-time high and deductibles being absolutely through the roof, because first of all, the average cost of a ransomware event is about $4 million. So that's the starting point of cost. So what's happening is the insurance companies are beating the drum. They're actually starting to dictate the actual cybersecurity tools and safety points that should be installed in an enterprise. And it's not necessarily a complete strategy. It doesn't necessarily take into account the business and how data flows and how the users operate. So that's become more of a risk, at least in my mind, because the tail's wagging the dog. The insurance company is dictating how cybersecurity should be purveyed, and it really needs to be turned around. So the smarter that our organizations can be, those of us that help our resellers and our resellers help their clients, the smarter we can be in providing good, solid solutions for that outcome will help kind of beat back the insurance company's influence on what the outcomes are. Because what's going to happen is that the clients are going to come to our reseller partners and they're going to say, hey, I need X and Y and Z because my insurance company said I got to have that, when it's really not necessarily the true outcome that's required. That comes through fact finding and a lot of digging in to understand how that business runs.
That's interesting. And would you guys mind just maybe touching briefly on the security controls that are required to even be, eligible to get cyber insurance?
Yeah, I talk about this every day. So sorry, I know the top 5 to CIS by heart. So it's identity access management, as we kind of alluded to before. It's multi-factor of remote tools. Then you remote in to fix things. Those all have to be multi-factor. You need encrypted backups, and you need EDR. EDR is a requirement in the CIS top 5 that almost any insurance agency is going to require, as that very noisy tool with a lot of staff needed to get started. So that's top 5, and there's 18 CIS controls. If you got the other 18, it's not going to hurt you. It's going to just help you more. But those top 5, forget about it if you haven't had those and they're not working effectively.
And there's
Amazing.
Nothing wrong with those top 5, by the way. But my concern is that clients might get blinded, if you will, into going down a path that may not be a complete cybersecurity strategy given their use cases. And that's what's really important here.
Yep, 100% agree. There's actually a couple I want to mention, not by name, but some of the managed security services we have out there, the vendors we support at Ingram Micro, have different policies that kind of put their money where their mouth is, saying if we're going to be managing your security practice, the back-end SIM for you on your behalf, we'll guarantee you up to a certain amount of dollars that when we're on the watch, that you will not have a breach. And if we are breached, we'll pay for the forensic remediations with the company of their choosing, of course, but they will actually allow that to happen. It's not cybersecurity insurance, but it's a form of sleeping better at night that I kind of like, that really is saying, hey, we're really good at our jobs and we'll guarantee it up to this dollar amount if things happen, which is kind of nice. And there's a couple in our line card that'll do that.
That's great, Brian. And ironically, since you're touching on managed security services, one of our vendor partners that's a leader in managed detection and response has shared, and they've indicated that probably by the end of this year, managed detection and response will be a security control that the insurance companies will want to see so that end users can qualify for cyber insurance.
Yep, I heard the same.
All right, terrific. All right, so this is our last question. Thank you to the audience for bearing with us. Hopefully you've been getting value out of the conversation. Forward looking, what does the future of security hold? I know it's hard to predict, but let's put our predictive hats on. And Jerry, do you want to go first?
Oh, sure. You know, the future is hard to tell, right? We just don't know. But what we're going to do, the future obviously is we're going to continue to see improvement of these TTPs, these tactics, techniques, and procedures that the bad actors are putting together. That's just going to continue and continue and continue, because what's happening is that smart people are going to college. They're getting their master's degree in cybersecurity. When they come out the door, they're taking that left turn and they're going to the dark side rather than going to work in corporate America. Why? Because there's more money in it. They can work from wherever they want, when they want, and they get paid better. So we can do nothing but assume that that's going to be the outcome. This is going to get worse before it ever gets better. Now, the defenses are improving, but they're not simply not stopping these outcomes. So we really need to understand threat and risk identification through training and experience. That's that user awareness. Putting together anybody who has a good, solid user training program is really got a ripe market here. Proactive mitigation of threats. They get past defenses. Say, no, they got through. Now, what do you do about it? Tools that that include intel and predictive capabilities. This is the the mandiant threat detection on one end, and and then of course being able to look at east-west traffic in the data center and make sure that things aren't going where they shouldn't be going. There's just a number of steps that are all part of this continuum. But really what's going to have to happen is that attack surface has to be reduced with least privilege, because those bad actors are going to get in and they're going to gain access, and they're going to infect backups, and they're going to infect key files, they're going to put ransomware up. And to stop that, you've got to reduce the capability of the users who are actually allowed to touch and handle data. They just must, because once a bad actor compromises those credentials, now they have the keys to the kingdom. So if they have the keys to the kingdom, if the kingdom is reduced to a room in the castle rather than the whole castle, then they can only do bad things in that room. So these are the types of things that we need to move forward with as an organizational entity in security. The attack surface is huge. The adoption of least privilege is minimal. About 50% of businesses are right now looking at a zero trust type of process. But really, we need to start training our kids. And I know it sounds silly, but when my kids were small, they learned to type because Apple gave schools Macs, and it took the letters off the keyboards, and they had to figure out how to type. So if you start this training at a really young age, where kids know what good behavior looks like and what bad behavior looks like, they're going to know the difference between cyber right and wrong, and they're going to be able to be a good citizen in the data use world, because they're not going to insist on having admin rights like folks do today. They're not going to throw a temper tantrum because they can't go to a certain websites because they want to check with this lunch special somewhere. These are the types of things that we have been working really hard to condition adults to change, and they haven't, and they don't want to. So we have to naturally overcome that by training the kids differently. So that's my 2 cents.
Right.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So
yeah.
With AI, Skynet's going to get formed, and robots are going to take over the world. Just kidding.
I'm sorry,
I love those movies. No, so yeah, on the same kind of conversation I've been having earlier throughout this, with the economy the way it is, consolidation is going to be a big piece of this. These managed services are going to come in. These automated tools like SOAR are going to come in more. Perfect example. People are adopting these managed services, but they're not doing it properly for their MSP practices. I had a partner the other day that had probably upwards of 10 different managed services, and he didn't consolidate any of these. These were all different vendors. So what was his team just looking at tools and doing what they can with tools manually? Instead, he decided to go with managed service route and have someone else watch these two for him. Well, didn't do anything to help him, because now he's got 10 different streams of alerts heading to him from each one of these different tools. So obviously my first recommendation was consolidate this. You can't have 10 different, dashboards you're looking at, that's defeats the purpose of managed services. You need to consolidate this. Things like mesh. As long as mesh has been around, it's becoming more and more prevalent right now, bringing in all these different tools into one location so they can be managed in one single location. And then we can augment the things that we need to with third parties in a different dashboard. But you shouldn't be looking at 10 different dashboards on any day trying to figure out what's happening in these environments, whether it's coming from a managed service or your own tools you're trying to provide, if that's on behalf of your customer base or for the end user customer as well. So consolidation of tools is going to be, key, and then staff augmentation. I agree with Jerry. My kids are young. They can get through a tablet and get through their security faster than anybody I've seen, but they don't know what they're doing. They just know what buttons to click, and they have no education on what to do when that happens. So by educating our kids when they're young on proper techniques, by the time they even get to the business and college level, they're going to have just this mindset that this is just how it is, versus having to learn this stuff from scratch. And why do I have to do this? This is so cumbersome. It's just going to be part of their inherent day. So yeah, if we bring them up with that mindset, then our future should be pretty sound, along with all the different tools. And I could get into like all these advanced different tools that could come out, and all my different prospects and what's going to happen in the future. But essentially, they're getting more advanced tools on the hacker side with developments of AI, and things are coming out more readily. We're going to need more advanced tools to prevent, be more proactive around these, and we're not going to be able to keep up. So that's where all these augmentations are going to happen, automations, to try to keep up with. That's kind of my 2 to 4 year outlook right now, is managed services are going to become very, very prevalent in the next couple of years to try to keep up with everything.
That's terrific. I'm going to be respectful and cognizant of time here. That concludes all the questions that I had for both Brian and Jerry. I did see a question come in via the question manager. And the question is, if I want to engage Brian or Jerry, how would I go about doing that? So Brian or Jerry, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, if you go to securitylinecard.com, there's a tab that's called bookings, and there's a whole bunch of key trends. I think there's upwards of 10 or 12 now. Any of those key trends, the Jerry and I are on, you can actually select us directly and look at our calendars and book directly from there. But there's actually our peers on there as well with any other related key trends or security technologies. You can also put on different, calendars and talk to those professionals who are SMEs in that specific area as well. So that's probably the easiest means.
That's terrific. Very efficient. I like it. Well, we're really at the bottom of the hour here. We're coming close. I want to really thank Brian and Jerry for your participation. The conversation and the dialogue was amazing. So appreciate you guys helping me out here. To you, our valued customer, thank you for attending. I hope this was valuable and you were able to walk away with a couple of actionable tidbits. So that concludes today's webcast. We're going to go ahead and end the show now. Thank you for joining, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, all.